Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
We were just saying, I think we spoke early on, I think maybe our second or third trip to DC before Chris and I had even launched ASP. And one of the reasons I think we haven't spoken since is because we haven't been able to coordinate a time because you're active military and you've been busy, which, to be honest, was not something I knew you could do, that you could hold these two jobs, being active service and in the Congress.
Yeah, you can. So it's basically guard and reserve. So it's really actually pretty strict on how you handle it. So if I'm on active duty status, so for instance, in a couple weeks, I'm going to go for 4 days to Omaha. But it's pretty cool because it's like, one of the unique things about our military is that you can have a job in civilian life and still serve and be ready to go. And I don't think Congress should be exempt from that.
Thank you for your service while being in service.
Yeah, you bet.
So being that you have a long 20-year history in the military, you bring a very unique vantage point into our conversation today about issues around extremism and white nationalism and domestic terrorism. First off, a recent study found that of the members of the Capitol riots that have been charged, 20% of them were either former or active U.S. military. So as a current member of the military, what are your thoughts on those numbers? And is there a larger issue with extremism and white nationalism in our military communities?
So first off, it's a concerning number, of course. And I think part of the problem is when somebody gets out of the military, you're kind of searching for a mission and a purpose. And it's part of the reason that reintegrating people, especially after war, is so important. And I think part of the reason you see military suicides as well is you kind of go from reaching almost an apex of a moment when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, when you're at war, and then you're trying to find some sense of purpose that's equivalent to that. And I think that allows some people to be more apt to be radicalized, especially if you're looking on the internet, you see this QAnon stuff and you get pulled down that rabbit hole, and now you consider it your duty to defend the country like you have before. So first off, I think commanders now and the military structure has to be more aggressive about saying that is unacceptable. And why is it unacceptable? Well, when I joined the military, I had to say, that I've never been a member of a communist organization, and I don't think we should allow communists in the military. Well, this is also an organization, QAnon and conspiracies, seek to overthrow the government that you're trying to defend. So I think the first step is to make people aware that that's what it is and that you can't be in the military and also subscribe to that. And then I think we need to consider putting questions like that on the SF-86, which is the security clearance background paperwork. Because if you are buying, QAnon and Pizzagate and some of that, you probably should not be the one charged with defending the Constitution of the United States.
How is the military currently addressing extremism in their ranks, and what more can they do?
I don't think there's been too much of an effort yet. So this is all, again, kind of a new to the forefront issue, especially given what happened on January 6th. And it's also, it's very fragile because on the one hand, you don't want the military to ever be politicized. So you don't want them to come out and say, you can't believe Republican viewpoints or Democratic viewpoints, but what is extremism? And so I think you're going to see, and I would imagine within the next few months, or 6 months within the military, computer-based training, which is typically how we do it, that says, you can't be part of an extremist group. You can't buy into it. You can't spread it. But it is a broader issue that not just for the military, but Congress has to get a handle on, which is what is free speech? We believe in free speech, even for military members to an extent. They also can't wear a uniform and endorse a presidential candidate. But when does that speech, turn into yelling fire in a theater? And that's, I think, a broader conversation that has to happen.
Since the attack at the Capitol, we've learned that over a dozen extremist and racist groups like the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys were participating in the riot that day. Why do you think we're seeing this increase of rhetoric and behavior at this time?
I feel like that with the past president, you've given license to some of that to be okay to say. Whether he intentionally did it or not, who knows, but when you say things like good people on both sides of the debate for Charlottesville, for instance, and you say things like, I know QAnon, I don't know anything about them, but I know they like me. When a leader begins to reflect darkness back to people, everybody, in your heart, it's always a battle of dark versus light every day. Sometimes darkness wins out, but when a leader speaks that darkness to you, it gives it permission to overtake you. And I think it's that combined with this advent of social media where people now can, find their own echo chambers and find their own conspiracies and come together on it and coordinate, seeing the amount of coordination that was happening prior to January 6th. I knew there was going to be violence. I didn't know they'd take over the Capitol, but that was just from looking at Twitter.
FBI Director Chris Wray testified on Capitol Hill this week about the Capitol attack and domestic terrorism. There's currently no federal criminal charge associated with domestic terrorism, as those crimes are often punished under laws governing hate speech and other forms of violence. Should there be a specific criminal offense for engaging in domestic terrorism?
I think to the extent where there is a opening, or I guess a gap in terms of what can be charged. When you start talking about domestic terrorism, it starts to get a little, tricky because you're dealing with amendment issues. And when we deal with, for instance, international terrorism, they don't have the protection of the Constitution. So there's a lot of different rules. You can kill an international terrorist. You can't necessarily kill a domestic terrorist. But I do think we need to be more aware of it. And if there is a reason to have a law like that to be able to stop things like what happened here, I would certainly be supportive. And I think, if people knew prior to January 6th that not coming to the rally was one thing, even though the rally was based on a lie that the election was stolen, but they knew that once they crossed that perimeter into the Capitol, and particularly when they threatened members of Congress or life and property, that would be a terrorism charge, it might have been a lot more deterrent to them. But I think we have to be careful. All of these we want to have not an emotional immediate reaction to, but a well thought out reaction that can actually settle down the situation in society and not necessarily make it any worse.
What role do you think that online misinformation, social media play into the radicalization and recruitment for these groups?
I think it's almost all of it. So it was one thing, back in the day when it would be even before email, I remember in the mid-90s, this whole idea that the UN was going to come and take over the United States and those conspiracy theories. But to see it spread about so quickly. I did a video on QAnon a year ago, and I had a lot of people that told me, well, we shouldn't do that video about QAnon because you're just going to give them attention. And I said, I think we're already too late. I think it's already too late to bring attention to disinfect that misinformation. Because a lie, what's the old, saying, a lie can be spread 1,000 times before the truth catches up. And so that's what you deal with the internet. When you have a tweet that goes out that says that twice as many people voted in Detroit, for instance, than were registered to vote, you'll see 20,000, 30,000 retweets. But when the correction comes out that actually it's the other way around, you'll see 10 or 20. So that's been a huge problem. And I think that's where really the next discussion on freedom of speech has to center around. We don't want the government controlling what you can and can't say, but we also have to recognize that this is detrimental to society. And some of this is certainly crossing into yelling fire in a theater and not protected.
You seem to be trying to lead a fight against all sorts of extremism. How do we fight extremism and hate speech without infringing upon our First Amendment rights?
I think, it's a couple things. First off, we have to understand that to de-radicalize people takes time, as it took them time to radicalize in some cases. I think it's being aggressive with the truth, telling the truth, calling out lies, calling out misinformation. The vast majority of people don't want to believe a lie, but they also don't necessarily want to search out the truth if the lie feels good. So while it seems like a Herculean task, I think there is some responsibility on leaders and members of Congress, sure. But I also think every American, when I saw the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma that just talks about how easily people are radicalized through the algorithms, everybody needs to have some responsibility for what they read and what they believe. And to the extent you have countries like Russia that help to spread and create misinformation, there is a fully different response, which is we need to go on the offensive against Russian misinformation as well. And what you'll see happen there is, for instance, a group like Sputnik, which looks like a legitimate news organization, will print something. And then that gets retweeted and picked up by more legitimate news-looking organizations. And then it becomes the truth, and it's not.
Lastly, slight shift in topic. President Trump spoke at CPAC this weekend. You've obviously been an outspoken critic of him and some of his policies. What do you think the future of the Republican Party is like if he chooses to run for president again, or even if he chooses to stay involved, as he said he wants to?
I think nobody knows. And I think that's what the battle among Republicanism is right now. You know, I started this movement, countryfirst.com, with a 1ST because it's presenting the counter narrative of a future looking party that's inclusive, that talks about conservatism not as who's not in, not as divisiveness, but as exactly what I believe it is, that a kid born in the inner city should have the same opportunity as a kid born in the wealthiest suburb. That's what really conservatism is. And so I think that battle is going to occur over the next number of months. And I think it's important to present the competing vision, to expose the lies, to call out the lies, and look forward and say, you may not agree with Republicans, or Republicans may not agree with Democrats, but we certainly, and it's what you guys are great at doing, we certainly deserve to have a conversation and at least learn a little from each other and not just see each other as the enemy. When you see each other as the enemy, frankly, the stuff we're going to debate today will pale in comparison to the stuff on the lower part of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs we'll have to debate if this place falls apart.
Congressman, thank you very much. As always, a pleasure. We really appreciate your candor, and we hope it won't be so long till we get to talk to you again.
Yeah, hopefully not. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Yeah.